Hello, welcome to this video. This is part 2 of my exploration of the great debate about progressive rock. Last week I did a video called What Makes Prog Great? And I was able to get into a lot of sort of quite esoteric ideas of what makes music great. And then from the idea of what makes music great, really make the argument of why progressive rock is so great. And I really discussed this idea of balancing perfectionism with hedonism, and really questioning what rock music was about, you know, and there being a certain period in progressive rock history where the best bands in the world doing that were progressive rock bands. And I also talked about the backlash that then came in when punk came out, which has stayed with progressive rock for the rest of time. You know, a backlash that has sort of labelled progressive rock as pretentious and indulgent and all that type of sort of thing. Well, on this video, I'm going to be talking about what makes progressive rock crap, but I'm not going to be saying it's pretentious or overblown. But I have got a list of things I've actually written down. Normally I don't prepare these things, but I knew this video was going to be so contentious that I thought I'd write 6 areas for discussion. All right? So, part 1 is called Girls Don't Like Prog. Right. So, I'm going to put a picture here, right? There. There's a picture there now, which shows the analytics of this channel, right? So you can have a good look at that. So you can see the average age of viewers of this channel is at its peak around about 55 to 65. This is definitely a place of nostalgia. It's a nostalgic place for a golden period in music. People of my age and older, we have been touched by a very sublime thing, a thing that has stayed with us right into middle age and older. And I think the people who enjoy my channel, they enjoy it because they get a chance to, you know, relive this wonderful thing of which progressive rock seems to represent. This life lived within the rock and roll era. Right. Whether we have that today, I don't know. I don't think we do. I think music's very important to people, but it doesn't touch people like music touched a generation, which I would call the rock and roll generation. So you can see, look at the analytics there. There's a lot of people of a certain age, but look at the gender. So 98% of you are male and 2% are female. Now, of course, rock and roll is the sexiest thing on the planet, isn't it? We all know this. But not when it comes to progressive rock. Now, is this a reason to call progressive rock crap? No, of course it's not. But it's a good starting point for my discussion on what makes progressive rock crap. I think it's not the fact that girls don't like it, right? And I think I nearly was going to call this video Why Girls Don't Like Real Prog. Because I think the fact that it cuts out half the population is not because all the men are listening to prog. I think there's a certain type of personality, of a certain type of male that is drawn towards progressive rock. And I don't think it's a healthy thing. Right, and that's where I'm going to start with this. Rock and roll is sexy. You know, this is the whole thing about it. There's a visceral element to rock and roll. It's the idea of the wild-eyed loner at the gates of hell, which is a sort of possibly a quote from The Young Ones, which is a British comedy TV show that ran in the early 80s. And I think that aspect of rock and roll we could classify as the visceral Dionysian aspects of rock music. Right? Certain bands like Led Zeppelin were able to become progressive but not fall foul of losing that strutting, striding rock and roll stance which is so important to it. Jimi Hendrix was able to make highly progressive music without losing that stance. But I think some of the progressive rock bands, they do. There's a tendency to lose the visceral, right? When punk rock came out in the 70s, I don't believe that it was the antithesis of prog. I think it shared a lot of features with prog, actually. But one of the things it brought back was the stance, right? The stance is very important for rock and roll, right? In the Sex Pistols, John Lydon's genius, because there's plenty of people here who will go, I don't get punk, I don't like it, they just can't play blah blah blah, and it's because they're looking in the wrong place. Often when you don't get music, it's because it's not doing what you want, it's doing something else. But the research into John Lydon as a character, who is part court jester, is part Zarathustra descending from the mountain, and he's part Richard III, you know, that's conscious. John Lydon knows what he's doing with that character. He brings the idea of the show, the shape. So many progressive rock bands, the show comes from the light show. It comes from other stuff. Early progressive rock bands really understood what the show was. You know, we think of like Genesis, Peter Gabriel, what he did in that band. If you think about what Kate Bush does, and as I talk, I realise that a lot of the progressive rock bands that were able to transfer to the 80s successfully is perhaps because they understood the importance of the show, the stance, the image of the iconic rock and roll star, you know, the David Bowie at the front of the stage, magnetic and charismatic. Often with prog that disappears. Now I'm sure the prog fans are shouting, yes, but it's all about the music, we're interested in the music, right? I'm going to get onto that, but we start with that idea, you know, prog is not sexy. Early on, it may not be sexy, but there's a stance there. Peter Gabriel, Ian Anderson with his leg and his codpiece, you know, it's there. And I think that's an essential quality to rock music, okay? Prog isn't bad for losing that, right? But it does lose it. But it's the reason why it loses it. So we move on to part two. And part two is called Rush and Darwinism, okay? It doesn't seem that from a Darwinistic point of view, prog should not have existed. It should have not evolved. Now this little section is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, so please take this with the humour I mean it. I'm just trying to draw attention to something with a little bit of humour. But if the world was made of Rush fans, it could be said that the species would die out pretty quick. Do you know what I'm saying? It's a certain type of male that is being drawn into the world of progressive rock, I think. All right. I always remember when I played with IQ, we would joke about the idea that you couldn't do that rock and roll chant. You couldn't say, you know, well, all the boys in the room say yeah, and now all the girls in the room say what? Because there weren't any. Me as a very young prog fan, I'm definitely one of these type of males when I was a teenager, you know, there is nothing like going to a party and cleaning the room, you know, with your Gentle Giant album. That was something I almost became proud of, you know, that I could do this at a party. Okay? In terms of the species surviving, progressive rock should not be here. So what purpose, from an evolutionary point of view, does it serve? Right? Well, I think what this is, when it's at its worst, is the music of obsessive compulsive disorder. When it's at its worst. And a very male version of obsessive compulsive disorder. Right? It's at its worst, and this is what is wrong with prog, when it gets sabotaged by the anal retentive aspects of the musicians that make it and the fans that devour it. Okay? And I think it's a very specific male version of that, which I think comes from a teenage want to hero worship. Okay, which I think is an evolved response. I think, you know, us as human beings, you know, for hundreds of thousand years, you know, males have occupied a certain status within societies. And I was reading the other day that actually, it's really quite interesting, is that when you go back to sort of pre-industrial societies, when they study those now, and they look at how the great hunters of these villages would be treated, if they go out and like actually would catch a woolly mammoth and bring it back, you know, and be able to feed the whole village, rather than being met with sort of hero worship, they would have been met with a sort of derision. Okay, but the success of you as a hunter would be the ability to emulate that. So as a teenage male, you would be looking at these hunters that were getting that sort of acclaim, but the acclaim is derision, and it's there to stop you from elevating your position within the whole herd. When I read about this, I thought, my God, this is progressive rock. I talk of this from my own point of view. You know, for me, when I was a youngster, I was listening to lots of heavy metal, which is very visceral. It's all about the shapes. You know, when I listened to heavy metal, there were girls that also liked heavy metal at the time. They would listen to these bands. You know, bands like the sort of the 80s hair metal bands that I grew up with, like Poison and all that, they were predominantly listened by girls, you know. But I'm a young male, and I've got those like anal retentive, you know, OCD type things going on, and that's all for me basing around the music and the technical aspects of the music and the virtuosity. And I think that's an evolved thing. I think it's because for certain males, it's about the acquisition of skill. Despite the derision, it still goes on. I got nothing socially from being able to play Heart of the Sunrise on the drums when I was 13, 14 years old. I got nothing for that at all. But for me, it was very important. And what was important was that everything had a place and everything was in its place, right? It was a kind of hero worship where I was worshipping the ability of these people not to strut around and be cool, you know, not to impress me with the way they looked, right? And I was impressed by that by certain rock musicians, but I was impressed by their technical ability. And it was a technical ability applied to the grid, to perfectionism. It was all about having it nailed and being able to play the hard thing, right? This for me, now we're 15 minutes into the video, is the heart of what is wrong with progressive rock, right? Is the belief that that is the thing that makes it good, right? When, as I said on the other video, I think progressive rock is at its best when the perfectionism of that is kept in a perfect balance with the hedonism and visceralness of rock and roll, okay? In other words, as soon as you start to explore this perfectionist avenue, right, which is the novel and compelling thing that is interested in it is brought into rock and roll and rock music in the 60s, right? This is my argument that what makes progressive rock good. My argument that what makes progressive rock good is also what makes it bad. The bringing in of these perfectionist, elitist elements into rock music in the 60s is what turns it into an art form. And we go deeper and deeper into that. The balances of rock and roll is like this visceral form here. And then we start to bring these elements in. And as they come up like this, there is a point, I believe, in the early 70s where progressive rock is leading the way, right? I believe, and this is the big narrative of my channel, that at this point, the music critics want it to be like that. They want to they want to serve their own elitism by championing the visceral. They want to be the clever people that are pointing at these innate geniuses and saying, look at that innate geniuses. They don't know what they're doing, but I do. And I will be the voice that explains to you why they're so great. But this Yes album, I haven't got a clue what's going on with that. It's too intellectual. There's too many illusions, literary illusions. There's too much musical information going on. There's too much experimentation. I actually can't get involved in that. It's reached that point of a point of artistic excellence. This is the whole point of my channel, is to really champion those bands. And they did that at a time when that was really important. This balance that's going on happens throughout the history of popular music. It happens absolutely with everything. You know, the advent of rap, you know, which is a really visceral form, simplistic form in the late 70s. And then we go through this thing where it becomes around about late 80s and early 90s, an absolute art form. And then it's gone. I believe it's been ruined by perfectionism. You can see it with dance music. It's happened over and over again. But my point is, the audience for progressive rock, there's an ear for that perfectionism, and there is an audience out there that will think that is the thing in itself. And that acts as a driver, commercially, for bands just to show off how clever they are. And there are musicians, more than enough of sort of mediocre musicians, who are quite happy to appease their own ego by trying to be the person who is clever and has got everything in the right place. So there is a tension within progressive rock, but that's going to happen, right? Even on the genius progressive rock, even the genius bands that have really, you know, pioneered and innovated incredible stuff, there will be an audience that is really only appreciating the technical aspects of it. Okay, this is the real Achilles heel for progressive rock, as far as I'm concerned. Right, so as I said on part one, and I'll explain this now, I am a progressive rock musician. I've played in a number of progressive rock bands. I talked about it in more detail in the last video, but I was a drummer for IQ. I was a founder member of the progressive rock band Frost. I've played with all the neo-prog guys. I've played with like Magenta. I've played with Kiyama, a whole bunch of different prog bands over the years. I currently have a prog band called Rain. We had an album out a couple of years ago called Singularity. We're just about to release our second album. And so the idea of what makes a good prog album and trying to maintain a position where we aren't undone by this huge drive to make the tracks as perfect and as nailed and as clever so everyone can appreciate our brilliance, right? That I have really tried from a production point of view to not get drawn into. Okay, this has been a big theme over the last few weeks, mixing the album, right? And I think, because I believe this is the big thing that makes prog crap, right? Is this very thing. And it's allied to a sort of obsessive compulsive disorder that are in, all of us have this to a certain extent, but I think there's a certain male version of this where it's really apparent, where everything has to have a place and be in its place. You know, I've joked up on this channel about the average prog fan. You know, if you go and look in their prog drawer, imagine having a prog drawer in their sock drawer, and you will find that they probably got all their socks colour coordinated, all their underpants are in a certain order. And if you went to their record collection, you know it's going to be alphabetised, and they're going to have it in genres and decades, and there's going to be cross-referencing, and that's what becomes really important to very many prog fans out there. The chaos that opens up Close to the Edge, right? The chaos of that, the unmitigated visceral madness that track opens, could well be lost on them. Or it could be that they appreciate the fact that their ability to start off like that and then suddenly go as they do and prove to us all that they knew what was going on all along. This is a symptom of OCD. right? For me, right? And OCD is in so much art and music. And there are swathes of musicians that can't actually make anything, cannot get a track out because they are disabled by their perfectionism. Right? They can't even listen objectively to what they do because all they can hear is the mistakes that they've made. Right? And they want to get those right. There is a big market for this. Now, if you're in a punk band, there's something inherent to the genre of punk where this is never going to happen. But in prog, this is the thing that makes it crap. Right? Is that. But it gets worse. One of the great innovations of progressive rock, one of the many great innovations of progressive rock, was the use of the technology of the recording studio. Right? The recording studio meant you could make music that was so much more than what you could make before. Right? If we just take multi-tracking, for example. Before multi-tracking, if you wanted to record a vocal, everyone goes in the room, they have to all play at the same time, the singer sings. You get something that's approaches something okay, maybe one flukes it, and if it's a good take and that singer was just a little bit flat here or came in a little bit late there, that's the take, we can't do anything about it. With multi-tracking, we can overdub that vocal again. Right? So straight away, the technology not only allows you to explore and innovate, but it allows you to become more and more perfect, right? So the perfectionism has been applied to music as the technology has improved. Where do we go? The advent of digital technology into recording is one of the biggest changes of the dynamic of recording. Now, it affects all music, but pop music is quite honest about this. You know, no one's playing on any pop record anymore. It's all computers that are playing that. Everything is perfect. Every beat is nailed to the grid. Every note is nailed to the grid. There's no microphones. There's no air. There's no mistakes in production or sound. There's no mistakes in execution because no one's executing anything. The singers that singing it sing into a program called Melodyne, which can then tune every note, re-pitch every note. It can put vibrato where it isn't there and take away vibrato when it is there. It can stretch and compress. Every single drum hit can be squashed and it all can be tied to the grid. Imagine now in the modern recording that most of the stuff doesn't need to be recorded anyway. Right now you may think you know that and you can hear it, but you really can't. What you think is real drums on an album could well not be real drums, right? What you think on an album is real bass playing or real singing, it could well be deeply edited on computer. Imagine it as a sort of perfectionist lever. Now we can just push that further and further forward, right? In pop music, it's quite honest. No one's pretending, you know, when you hear whatever you're hearing, that those are real people on those records. You know, this is created by computer. But with modern prog, that want to be perfect, that want to have everything nailed and to show how great you are, has moved to a point now where people aren't really playing on the record. Now, I'm going to tell you something that might shock you, okay? For years and years, if something was recorded on one track, right, you can't get to that one thing. It was locked inside the track. So if you've got a mono recording of a Beatles song, you can't take that bass out the track and isolate it. Now with computer technology, you can take that bass out of the track and you can hear it. People have apps on their phones where they could take the drums off a stereo recording and replace the drums. Right, so we now have the technology to delve into audio and take certain elements out of it. Right, this has been very important in the remixes of the Beatles albums that are going on at the moment, and you'll see if you get on YouTube, you will find out what's actually happening. And with the Get Back film that Peter Jackson made, the same technology that is used to recreate people's faces, you know, that CGI technology, that's been applied to go deeper into these audio recordings, because some of these Beatles albums, right, were mixed very unprofessionally. right? In our modern, is that the word perfectionism? I don't think it is, but I'm going to use it. In our modern society, right, the mixes are no longer satisfactory. They're not perfect enough, right? And the reason for this is because people are listening to it on crap little AirPod things in their ears off a crap little phone. And Beatles albums, you'll get a track where, because of the limits of the technology in terms of multi-tracks, you will get all the tracks, guitar, bass, drums, vocals, all on one side of the stereo, and then a tambourine and something else on the other side. And so when you're listening to them, it's quite uncomfortable. So they want to remix these Beatles albums. Me, I wouldn't touch them. I would not touch them, because there's money to be made, isn't there? There's money to be made in these remixes. And I'm sure a modern audience will go, oh, that's far more comfortable. I can now deal with this, modern music. You know what I don't talk about on this channel? This is the bit where I explain why I don't talk about on this channel. Anyway. So they want to remix Revolver or whatever it is, and they can't. The technology, there's so much stuff crammed in that they cannot quite pull Paul McCartney's bass part out. They can't quite hear what's going on with the drums, and so they can't separate it out. So that CGI technology, what they can do is the computer can now listen to that Beatles song. It can listen to how Paul McCartney plays. It can listen to the way he holds his pick and the way he hits the string and the sort of note choices he makes, the phrasing he makes. And then it will invent a bass part that it imagines Paul McCartney has played. And they're using this technology now to draw out the information. All right? My kids have got TikTok, and TikTok on there's software now where you can basically type text in, and then a computer generated voice will sing that part. We are now on the cusp of a point in music history where computers will be able to analyze what makes records great, and then it will be able to create what sounds like real people singing, what sounds like, you'll be able to say, I want Paul McCartney on bass, I'll have Billy Cobham on drums, I'm going to have Keith Emerson on keyboards, we'll have Shaka Khan, Tina Turner, Ronald James Dio, we'll have them on vocals, and you'll have to program it in, and we're going to do a track like Hotel California, and the computer will be able to generate something that sounds like real people playing, and it will be the most perfect thing that you have ever heard in your life, right? That is the point we're at now. If you listen to modern prog bands, to me, they have already 10, 20 years ago been beset by the commercial constraints of trying to deliver music to an audience which is comprised, not all, but of some very anal retentive people who have become, and this is the next part of my talk, the gatekeepers of what prog is. Right? This is the biggest discussion you will ever get in prog circles, is lots of anal retentive people trying to tell you what prog should be. And I have been involved in this for many years, and I actually got out of the prog world because I felt that my artistic I got into progressive rock because I felt it was a place where I could explore the outer limits. So then I found out, no, it's the exact opposite of that. The prog fans will deem stuff which is so pedestrian and conservative prog if it sounds like Pink Floyd or Genesis. Two guys, a band, churning away over two chords while someone plays a Dave Gilmour guitar solo for 10 minutes will be determined as being prog. You doing anything weird, you bring in some rap and put it in an odd time signature, or really mess with the electronics, or bring in techno instruments, all the stuff that these progressive rock bands would have done in the 70s, and then those gatekeepers go, well, I don't think this is prog at all. This isn't prog, right? That combined with the technology that allows musicians to make recordings that are absolutely perfect despite their technical abilities, but will push the buttons of these people where they will go, oh my God, they're such great players. Are they? Are they? And do you really know what makes a great player? Right? Are these the same people that walk around going, oh, Jimi Hendrix was nowhere as good as Steve Vai or Joe Satriani? God in heaven. This is the problem with progressive rock. I hope I have spelt it out. Is what we have now is a bunch of bands trying to push generic buttons in an anally retentive audience that are there and want two things. They want to hear something that sounds like Genesis or Pink Floyd or whatever their choice of prog band is that they think determines what prog band is. And they want to do it in the most perfectionist way possible so that they can sit there and appreciate the brilliance of these people that aren't brilliant, but they think they're brilliant because the computers make them sound like they're brilliant. There we go. 30 minutes it took to get there. Oh, I bet that's upset some people. But I think there's a whole bunch of other people out there that will be laughing their heads off now and clapping their heads. I'm actually clapping their hands together like this because I've actually come out and said it. The great big lie of modern progressive rock. Not all bands are doing that today. Some people are really playing and they are letting the mistakes in and they are really singing and they're not going through and tuning every single note of the voice in and play it in every single beat and then programming stuff that they couldn't play in the first place in, right? There's a lot of musicians out there that have grown up listening to this sort of perfectionist prog, especially the prog metal areas, and it's actually pushed the technical ability out. But I can remember a period where I was listening to prog metal and going, none of these drummers can play this is all programmed. But kids have been listening to this stuff and now there's kids coming out and playing in that way, and they can get very successful by putting on their favourite, Animals as Leaders track and sitting at home and playing along to it note perfect, and they will get the applause by all the anal retentives when they get everything absolutely perfectly right and everything is on the grid, and they will get a clap for that, and they can actually build not a career but some notoriety on Instagram by being the person that does that, right? Now, going back to my thing about AI, this is the big thing we're on at the moment. Are these people going to clap computers doing this? They're virtually doing that now, but as AI creeps in and people are able to go, computer, come up with the most complex, nailed, progressive metal track of all time, and suddenly we listen to stuff that's actually inhuman to play, they're going to turn around and go, oh, I don't like this. I want real people to do it. Why? Why do you want that? Why is it so important that real people play this? Because when real people play it, they do something that the machines can't do. What do they do? From a pure music point of view, just listen to it. So what do they do? Well, they like bringing emotion into it. There we have it. Music, when it's at its best, is a balance between emotionalism and perfectionism. And that is what has got lost from modern progressive rock. Not all of it, right? And I'm sure everyone's going to start screaming examples. Guthrie Govan's guitar solo on Drive On when his string went out of tune and he came up with something better because he was limited to what he was doing. That's an incredible solo. I love it. There's loads of prog out there that I really love, right? But that album, that Raven That Refused to Sing album by Steve Wilson, was produced by Alan Parsons, and they were all in the room playing at the same time, right? Whether you can say that to other Steve Wilson albums, more recent ones, where he's really gone down the sort of modern production methods. But there's a great interview on Rick Beato's channel where he is talking with Steve Wilson. And Steve Wilson is pretty much saying exactly the same thing I'm saying here, that what makes music great is the imperfections. The perfectionism, the virtuosity is not where great art resides. It's just not. It's an aspect that comes in which is in balance. The whole thing that makes art great is when it shows us that where the limits of perfectionism, because perfectionism is a thing that does not exist. It's made up by people, principally Plato, right? And it was made up to describe how we can unify certain ideas. It's all, he was like a prog fan and he wanted to be able to, create a genre. He wanted to be able to describe things as belonging to one thing, So it was a philosophical problem, in other words. I am being facetious about something that you may not be aware of. So, you have a mouse, So what does a mouse look like? We know what a mouse is, but how do we know what a mouse is? Because a mouse could be a little creature running around the floor, it could be Mickey Mouse, or it could be a mouse that used a computer. So what Plato came up with was the terrible idea that there's a Platonic form, the idea of the perfect mouse that exists in the perfect realm. Right? This idea of a perfect mouse, the perfect realm, is then picked up by Christianity, because early Christianity was really influenced by the Neoplatonists, and we get this idea of heaven and hell. And heaven and hell picks up on an idea of almost like order and chaos. It takes that Apollo Dionysian thing, which I have said is what art's all about, and it divides it up. It puts one here, and it elevates perfectionism as being the higher form, right? And so art that exhibits perfectionism to a certain type of person is very attractive for them to go, that's where the art is, because it's perfect, right? This really comes from Plato. I believe it's one of the worst ideas. Nietzsche in his, which is it, Birth and Death of Tragedy? Is that what it's called? I might have got that title wrong. It's either Birth of Tragedy. I think it's called Birth of Tragedy. He counters this, and he goes back to this much older idea of these things in balance. And this is what's really informed me. And it's been such a great yardstick. If you could create art which has just the right amount of visceral emotionalism, just the right kick in the face, or tears, or sadness, or whatever it is, if you've got that, and you balance that by it being executed well enough to achieve that emotional end, then you have great art. And culturally, because we exist at certain times, the art changes, because culturally that has to be established over and over again. We need to keep going back onto what is good, and what is good is the balance between these two things, right? Art that does not do that is not good. It's crap, right? And this, because progressive rock in its very nature, unlike disco or punk, has in its DNA a strong perfectionist aspect that will bring out the things I've spoken in this video, and that is, for me, is the big downside of progressive rock. So I think I have argued I've said what I wanted to say. I've got Plato in, I've got Nietzsche in. I think I've said everything I wanted to say. I think I've insulted enough prog fans out there, which is always good. Got to do that once a week, because I think these anal retentive prog fans, they might have another aspect where they actually quite enjoy being criticised like this. I myself would class myself in that group. I was definitely like this as a young prog fan. Years later, as a working musician, I realised how important this visceral, emotional element was. It was the thing that made it good. When you're going into a studio and trying to record a drum part, they're not buying a drum machine, they're buying you playing. And you got to get it just right, and just playing like Neil Peart, like I said it. Playing like Neil Peart, where everything is just exactly on the beat all the way through, is great for Rush. But as I said earlier, is it great for the future of our species? We don't want the world full of Rush fans, do we? That's a joke, by the way. These are jokes. There's little jokes all the way through this. Don't take it with tongue in cheek. If don't take everything I say so seriously, because it isn't so serious. This is fun. That's the whole thing about music, is we get to talk about very important things, but in a very safe way. That's what art does, And no one should fall out about it. And remember, I love all the stuff that you love, except for Marillion. I don't like them. Right, I'm going to finish there now, because I'm going to open up another door into another world of horribleness. And you'll all start leaving. Don't unsubscribe, will you? Please don't leave me. Just because I said you're an anal retentive with OCD, please don't leave me. Just remember, you come here for this, The other channels that talk about prog rock, they don't go here, do they? They don't go down this route. I do, because I think it's funny. Right, it's funny because there's an aspect of progressive rock where the tongue is firmly in the cheek. Right, that's what it's all about. If you don't understand that, you don't understand what progressive rock is there's an element of Monty Python in all the best progressive rock. But this is a video that we need to do another day. I really am going on. I don't feel like I've quite got everything out, so I'm keeping talking. But I think I have. I think I'm going to finish there. We'll have to come back to this another day. I hope we get quite a few viewers on this, because I think the progressive rock videos are definitely the ones that are most successful. And I think I really want to, on the next few videos I make, especially over Christmas, is take a progressive rock view of other stuff. I think that's the next thing I'm about to do, which is why I really wanted to state my position as a progressive rock fan and also a progressive rock musician. Anyway, I think I'm done. I've rattled on. I really have rattled on this video, haven't I? Okay, we will finish there. I will see you on the next video. If you like this video, then like it. If you want more of these sort of rambling philosophical things where I never quite know where I'm going, you know, tell me in the comments and I'll do more of these. I never know sure whether I should be doing these or not. If you want to know more and see more, then press the notification bell. I have a Patreon, and on that Patreon there's quite a few videos there, but there's also lots of my music there, and I'm now starting to put a lot more written stuff up there, a lot more sort of, you know, like blog posts where I can go deeper in there. And I've just today done a little article on comedy and the English aesthetic and how that relates to progressive rock, which is something I just could not get into on a video on here. It's far too esoteric, and also sometimes it's good to write because you can sort of consolidate your thoughts. When I'm doing these rambling videos, you're actually watching my brain forming certain ideas, you know. Anyway, so if you want to become a patron, click on the Patreon down below. We're finished. I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.